An elderly lady sings an old song as she sees a wealthy woman getting out of her luxurious car, but the woman is terrified when she hears the song, and something surprising happens. The sun shone in the blue sky without clouds, lighting up the sleepy little town with its cobblestone streets and old houses painted in earthy tones. It was an ordinary afternoon for the residents until the distant roar of a powerful engine broke the silence. In a few minutes, a luxurious, black, shiny car slid down the main road, capturing everyone's attention. The vehicle strongly contrasted with the simplicity of the place, where bicycles and aged cars were the norm. Curious, the residents stopped what they were doing to observe the figure that would step out of such an unusual vehicle. The car doors opened with a soft click and out came Olivia. Tall, slender, dressed in designer clothes, each piece carefully selected to reflect her status. Large dark sunglasses covered part of her face, while the gentle breeze lightly moved the perfect strands of her blonde hair, cascading in waves down to her shoulders. Olivia glided out of the car with the rehearsed elegance of someone accustomed to being watched. The sound of her high heels echoed in the silent square, but she didn't mind. Her gaze swept over the town with indifference, as if she were looking at something insignificant, a mundane scene unworthy of her attention. It was as if, with a single blink, she had already judged everything around her, labeling each curious face, each weathered wall, as if they were far beneath the world she belonged to. The residents, still intrigued by the imposing presence of the woman, kept their eyes fixed on her, but Olivia did not notice them. Her eyes, hidden behind large sunglasses, expressed nothing but coldness. The whispers and glances of others made no difference. To her, they were just distant murmurs from a place with which she would never connect. That town did not deserve her, and she made sure to convey that in every movement, in every calculated gesture. As Olivia walked with firm steps, it was impossible not to notice the contrast between her presence and the environment around her. The uneven stone ground of the square did not match her expensive heels, and the simple faces of the residents seemed bothersome, even though she refused to look directly at them. There was an invisible barrier between Olivia and that small town, a barrier she seemed to enjoy reinforcing. Her haughty posture and raised chin revealed the arrogance of someone who believes themselves to be above everyone else, untouchable. The few shopkeepers watching her from their stores felt the same sense of disdain emanating from Olivia. Some even tried to smile, wave politely, hoping to elicit some sign of kindness from the woman. But Olivia did not return any gesture. She was like a closed fortress, unreachable in her superiority, where nothing happening there seemed worthy of her attention. There was something cold and cutting in her presence, which made the natural warmth of that place lose some of its strength. As she passed through the square, it was as if time had slowed down. The once curious glances now mingled with slight discomfort. It was impossible to ignore the silent disdain she conveyed, even without saying a single word. Olivia moved as if she were in a display case, but a display case where no one there could afford what she represented. Wealth, power, fame. All of that seemed unattainable to the people around her, and she made sure to emphasize this distance. The wind lightly swayed the impeccable dress Olivia wore, but even this gentle touch seemed unable to reach her heart. She continued steady, without glancing at anyone, as if passing through a place that did not deserve her attention. The blooming gardens, the playing children, the elderly seated on sunlit benches. None of this touched her. To Olivia, it was just an insignificant backdrop, a brief interruption in her grand life. Some older women, with watchful eyes, exchanged glances as they saw her pass by. There was something profoundly disturbing about how Olivia ignored the life around her. It was not just a lack of empathy, it was as if she were above even basic human emotions. And as she walked through the square, surrounded by eyes seeking some kind of connection, she only widened the gap between herself and the others. Olivia's steps were slow but confident, as if she knew exactly where she was going. However, there was not a spark of emotion on her face. She was there for a reason, and that reason seemed purely practical. The disdain radiating from her gestures was almost palpable, as if she were about to leave the place without a second thought. It wasn't a place for her, and Olivia made sure to reaffirm this with every second. Martha was sitting on her old wooden bench across the square as she did every day. Her eyes, though marked by time, remained sharp, attentive to every movement around her. Age had left her frail, with white hair pulled into a tight bun and skin wrinkled like the pages of an old book, but her mind remained alive, full of memories she rarely shared. Her wrinkled hands rested on her lap, holding a woolen shawl that seemed as old as she was. But that afternoon, something disturbed the tranquility of her routine. When the black car entered the square, Martha's eyes narrowed. There was something about that woman that seemed strangely familiar, as if she knew her from somewhere, from some distant time. While everyone in the square was distracted by Olivia's ostentation and elegance, Martha saw more than just wealth. She saw beyond the expensive clothes and the haughty demeanor. What Martha perceived was a shadow from the past, something that stirred memories that, until that moment, had remained dormant in her mind. Martha's heart beat a little faster, an unusual sensation for someone of her age. Her eyes remained fixed on Olivia, following every movement, every firm step the woman took towards the square. The way she walked, with the posture of someone carrying the weight of the world, made something shift inside Martha. A distant echo of a song, a face she couldn't quite recall, but that was there, hidden within the folds of her memories. Time seemed to pause for a few moments, as if the universe was about to reveal something important. She pulled the shawl closer to her body, as if she needed to protect herself from a wind that only she felt. The air around her seemed heavier, filled with hidden meanings that the others, entertained by Olivia's shiny car, would never notice. Martha knew that woman wasn't there by chance. There was a reason. And somehow she sensed that this reason was deeply rooted in something that happened a long time ago, when the world was different, and the past wasn't buried so deeply. As Olivia walked through the square, Martha's mind began to wander, retrieving fragments of memories. It was as if each step the woman took brought forth a new image, a familiar feeling that she couldn't ignore. Martha recognized that posture, that distant look, the way Olivia seemed to isolate herself from the world around her. And though her heart was restless, she remained silent, simply observing, trying to understand what her instinct was telling her. Children ran around the square, and the residents continued to murmur among themselves about the mysterious visitor, but Martha heard something else. It wasn't the sound of conversations or laughter. It was an internal sound, something that came from deep within her soul. A song, an ancient melody, that softly echoed in her mind, like a forgotten lullaby. A memory almost erased but now coming back to life, simply by seeing that woman from afar. With trembling hands, Martha closed her eyes for a moment, trying to grasp the thread of that elusive memory. She felt she was on the verge of discovering something, but a piece of the puzzle was still missing. What was that sense of déjà vu that enveloped her? Why did the mere presence of Olivia transport her to such a distant time? When she opened her eyes again, the feeling lingered. That encounter was no coincidence. None of this was. The words danced on the tip of her tongue, but she held them back as if it wasn't yet the right time to speak. There was something sacred in the silence of that afternoon, something that needed to be respected. Martha knew that when the words were finally spoken, they would change everything. But until then, she would wait, with the patience and wisdom of someone who has lived long enough to understand that destiny has its own timing. As Olivia walked, proud, Martha felt a tear escape her eyes, but she quickly wiped it away with the back of her hand. She didn't know why she was crying, but something inside her was already preparing for a truth that, though painful, needed to be revealed. Deep down in her soul, she knew this was just the beginning. The heavy silence that hung over the square was broken by an unexpected sound. Amid the indifference and the muffled murmur of the onlookers, a soft melody, almost imperceptible at first, began to fill the air. Martha, sitting on her wooden bench, opened her wrinkled lips and let out an old song. Her voice was weak but loaded with an emotion so deep that it seemed to emerge from the roots of her soul. The melody, simple and melancholic, echoed with a subtle beauty, contrasting with the atmosphere of superficiality that had settled with Olivia's arrival. The song seemed to carry a story, a pain kept hidden for years. It wasn't just a song, it was a lament disguised as a melody, a voice that cried for something lost in time. Each note that emerged from Martha's throat floated in the air, as if the walls of the old houses around were silent witnesses to a forgotten past. The birds, which had been chirping happily, fell silent as if respecting the moment, and even the wind seemed to move to the rhythm of the melody, making the leaves of the trees sway gently. Those who walked near the square noticed the change in the atmosphere, something undefined, as if the air had acquired a different weight. The words of the song, though indistinct to those not paying attention, were loaded with old feelings and untold stories. Some of the older residents, from a distance, recognized the sad and mysterious tone that permeated the melody. It was a song that no one had heard in a long time, a tune that belonged to a distant past, something almost forgotten. And even without knowing exactly why, they stopped in silence to listen. Martha sang with her eyes half closed, as if she were somewhere else, far from the small square where she had lived for so many years. Her frail body seemed even smaller, but her voice, though soft, filled the space with an almost tangible presence. There was something hypnotic in every verse, something that seemed to bring buried memories to the surface, not just for her but for everyone nearby. The sadness in her voice was contagious, and those who paid attention felt their hearts tighten without quite understanding why. The melody danced in the air, traveling between the trees, gently touching the facades of the houses, passing among the people who suddenly seemed frozen by the enchantment of that music. There was no rush in Martha's voice. Each note was drawn out as if she were savoring the pain that came with it. It was an old song from a time that few there remembered, but that still had the power to move those who listened, even without knowing where it came from. The sound of the song was different from the everyday noises. While cars passed in the distance and voices mingled in the air, Martha's melody cut through the atmosphere like a whisper full of secrets. There was something about it that seemed to connect everything around: ancient streets, century-old trees, even the sky above the town seemed to darken slightly, as if time itself were leaning in to listen. And with every second, Martha's voice became more penetrating, more laden with emotion. Anyone paying attention would feel a shift in the town's rhythm. It was as if time had slowed down, each second dragged down by the weight of that melody. Some passers-by paused their hurried walks, tilting their heads slightly, trying to understand where that voice was coming from and why their hearts seemed to beat to a different rhythm. There was something almost mystical about that moment, an invisible force pulling everyone into that instant, into that voice that seemed to have emerged from decades of silence. The square, which had previously been enveloped in an atmosphere of indifference and superficial curiosity, was now overtaken by a strange stillness. The whispers ceased, and the conversations dissolved into the air, as if Martha's melody had the power to silence the world around her. Her eyes, which had once watched Olivia with intensity, were now closed, as if she were singing to someone far away, someone only she could see. Each verse was a line from an ancient poem, a message that only a few could decipher. The sadness in the song was almost palpable, laden with a mystery that no one dared to interrupt. The gaze of the residents, once focused on Olivia, now slowly turned toward Martha. There was something in that song that drew everyone's attention, something that, although no one could quite explain, made sense on a deep level. That moment was beyond the ordinary. It was as if the past and present had met for a brief moment, uniting what had been lost. Martha's voice, still fragile and trembling, echoed through the square like a breeze filled with memories. The sound floated with the lightness of a falling leaf, but its impact was powerful. Something was about to change, and the song seemed to herald that. Olivia walked with her usual haughtiness through the square, but suddenly, something made her stop abruptly. In the air, a gentle and fragile melody began to flow, invading her senses without permission. Her posture, previously firm and indifferent, froze. The melody seemed to approach slowly, enveloping her in an invisible web that pulled her back to a place she never wanted to revisit. The music, which to others might have been just an old and unfamiliar song, was like a whisper from a distant time to Olivia. The wealthy woman, so accustomed to controlling every aspect of her life, suddenly felt vulnerable. What was that strange feeling? Her eyes, hidden behind the large sunglasses, couldn't conceal the change in her expression. The disdain and indifference she displayed just moments ago evaporated, replaced by a chilling emptiness, a terror that began to emerge in her soul. Something about that music stirred a deep fear, as if it were unearthing memories she had fought for years to forget. The melody continued to linger in the air, and Olivia, now motionless, seemed to have lost control of her body. It was as if the solid ground beneath her feet was crumbling. Her breathing, once calm and controlled, became irregular. Something was happening inside her, something she couldn't name, but it was undeniable. Her hand instinctively reached for her chest, as if trying to contain the rapid beating of her heart, but nothing seemed to be able to stop the wave of emotions that began to swell. A chill ran down her spine, rising slowly, and she felt her skin prickling. Her lips, once pressed into a line of disdain, trembled for a brief moment. Olivia tried to understand why that song, sung by an old woman she had never seen before, seemed so familiar, so incredibly intimate. At first, she tried to rationalize, but each time Martha's soft voice reached her ears, more fear crept into her mind. The emotional barriers she had built throughout her life began to crumble. The square, which moments earlier had seemed small and insignificant to Olivia, now seemed to be closing in around her. The sound of the song surrounded her, and there was no escape. With every note, every word whispered by the elderly woman, Olivia's heart tightened more, as if being crushed by something invisible but painfully real. Her head began to spin, and the image of the square distorted around her. She felt an urge to run away, but her feet wouldn't obey. She was trapped. Behind the dark glasses, Olivia's eyes began to fill with tears, something she hadn't allowed to happen for many years. But there, in that moment, everything was slipping out of her control. It was as if that melody was pulling a piece of her from within that she had tried to hide from the world, and from herself. The fear that overwhelmed her wasn't just the fear of the unknown, but the fear of recognizing what that song was bringing to light. A part of her past that she believed was buried forever. Suddenly, the air around her felt suffocating. Olivia struggled to breathe as if each breath was blocked by an invisible barrier. The song seemed to squeeze her chest tighter and tighter, forcing her to confront something she didn't want to see. Her fingers trembled at her side, and the hand that had firmly held the strap of her designer handbag was now tense, as if it could release it at any moment. The world around her began to crumble. She tried to move, to take another step, but her feet were heavy, anchored to the cobblestone ground as if they were trapped in the past that the song evoked. For the first time in a long time, Olivia, the woman who had always been in control of her life, felt powerless. Panic was etched across her face, tension visible in her shoulders, as if she were carrying the weight of something much greater than she could bear. Every fiber of her being wanted to resist, but the music would not allow it. Olivia had no sense of how much time had passed. Minutes? Seconds? The only thing she felt clearly was the deep terror that dominated her, the fear of something she knew she could no longer ignore. The song continued, as if the melody itself was forcing a locked door inside her to open. And when Olivia finally realized that she could no longer run away, the terror on her face became absolute. Something was about to happen. Something that would change everything. As the melody continued to resonate through the square, something inside Olivia began to take shape with painful clarity. The chill climbing her spine grew more intense, and suddenly the source of that discomfort became clear. That song. That melody. It wasn't just any music. Olivia knew it. A distant memory, almost forgotten, began to surface like an uncontrollable tide. The sound, which had previously seemed merely strange and disturbing, now revealed a deep connection, as if each note were tied to her own story. It was the same song her mother used to sing to her when Olivia was just a child. The soft voice of her mother echoed in her mind, singing that melody during silent nights while little Olivia fell asleep in her arms. The memory was old, almost erased by time and the layers of luxury and success she had built over the years. And yet, there it was in broad daylight, in the middle of that forgotten town, being confronted by a sound that belonged to her most intimate past. Her body trembled slightly, and her heart pounded erratically. It couldn't be. That moment seemed impossible. No one other than her family members knew that song. It was a unique melody, a kind of secret hymn, passed down from generation to generation. How could that old woman, a complete stranger, know something so personal, so intimate? Doubt and fear mixed inside her, turning her confusion into panic. Olivia tried to control her breathing, but the song enveloped her, bringing back moments she believed had been buried forever. Each verse transported her back to her childhood bedroom, to her mother's warm arms, to the comfort of a time when everything was simple and safe. But now this same song, which once was a memory of love, seemed laden with a much darker and more mysterious meaning. What did it mean? Why did this woman in that place know a song that belonged only to her family? The words of the song intertwined with the memories surfacing in her mind. The scent of her mother's perfume, the gentle touch of her hands, everything returned with overwhelming clarity. But along with these memories came a sense of loss, of something that had been taken from her a long time ago. Olivia had spent her life running from these memories, building a barrier of success and wealth, but there, in that square, the past found her in a cruel way. She felt as if she were trapped in an emotional snare. The more the music played, the deeper she sank into the recollections, and the more doubt and fear grew. Why now? Why here? Olivia knew that the past had a way of finding us in the most unexpected moments, but this coincidence was too disturbing to be merely a matter of luck. The song was not just a memory. It was a key to something much bigger, something that Olivia was not ready to face. The old song, which once brought comfort and security, now sounded like a warning. Every word seemed loaded with hidden meaning, and every note, a secret waiting to be revealed. Olivia didn't know if she was ready for what was coming next, but she felt she had no choice. The memory of her mother, singing softly at the bedside, mixed with the image of Martha there, singing the same melody, and the contrast between the two figures left her bewildered. She tried to push the feeling away, tried to tell herself that it was impossible, that it was just a coincidence, but the music wouldn't let her. It was as if the notes of the song were etched into her soul, now echoing, forcing her to remember things she would rather forget. The old woman's voice seemed connected to something deep and painful, something Olivia never thought she would have to revisit. And the more she listened, the more her mind filled with questions that had no answers. The world around her seemed distant now, and all that existed was the melody and the memories it stirred. Deep down in her heart, Olivia knew that this song was not there by chance. There was something more behind that woman, something that was about to be revealed. And despite the fear, Olivia could not shake the certainty that in some way her life would never be the same. Confusion overwhelmed Olivia, taking hold of every fiber of her being. The song, that melody that transported her to her mother's arms, still echoed in her ears, and the terror made her act without thinking. Her feet, which once seemed rooted to the ground, now propelled her towards the old lady sitting on the bench in the square. Her heart pounded so hard that she felt as if it might burst from her chest. What had once been a calm presence now seemed like an indescribable threat. "How do you know that song?" The words escaped her lips almost like a scream, laden with disbelief and fear. Martha, however, did not react with the same intensity. Her eyes slowly lifted to meet Olivia's, and there was something deeper than surprise there. A mixture of serenity and understanding filled the elderly woman's expression. The smile that played on her lips was not one of provocation but of someone who already knew the answer before the question was asked. Olivia, confused and unable to control her emotions, demanded answers, but Martha, with her enigmatic air, seemed to move to a different rhythm altogether. "Answer me," Olivia insisted, her voice trembling, now without the tone of authority she usually used to get what she wanted. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Around them, the town continued with its routine, but for those two women, time seemed to have stopped. The world had shrunk to that moment, to that confrontation. Olivia felt the urgency to understand, to unravel the mystery before her. The idea that this woman, a complete stranger, could know such an intimate melody was too absurd to accept. Yet Martha remained serene. Her voice, when she finally decided to speak, came out soft but filled with meaning. "There are many things you don't know yet, my dear," she said, her words flowing with a disconcerting calm. The slight smile on her face didn't offer immediate answers but suggested that those answers were close, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Olivia, still trembling with fear and confusion, didn't know if she wanted to hear what was coming next. The old woman cast her gaze to the ground for a brief moment, as if carefully choosing her next words. Olivia, on the other hand, felt impatience growing inside her. How could this woman remain so calm while her world was falling apart? She wanted to shout, to shake the elderly woman, to force her to reveal everything at that moment, but something in Martha's calm demeanor held her back. It was as if the woman's serenity was rooted in something much deeper than Olivia could understand. "This song is not just a simple melody for me," Martha said, her words sounding almost like a confession. "It's part of something bigger, something that connects you and me in ways you never imagined." Martha's smile remained, but her eyes now shone with an intensity that Olivia couldn't decipher. The fear that had consumed her before now began to turn into a mix of curiosity and disbelief. How could she be connected to someone she had never seen before? The wind gently stirred Martha's shawl, and the sound of the leaves mingled with Olivia's heavy breathing. The tension between them grew, but unlike what Olivia expected, the answer did not come immediately. Martha was in no rush, and this bothered Olivia deeply. Every second without an explanation seemed to stretch time, making the wait almost unbearable. "Please tell me, who are you?" Olivia finally pleaded, her voice now softer, filled not with demands but with desperation. Martha looked at her with compassion, as if she understood perfectly the whirlwind of emotions taking over Olivia at that moment. "You will understand, my dear," she replied, her voice still carrying mystery. "But not all truths are easy to accept." Olivia felt a shiver run down her spine. Whatever was about to be revealed at that moment would change everything she knew about her own life. The certainty of this was in Martha's gaze, in the serenity she carried as she spoke. And then, for a brief moment, the words ceased. The space between them, once filled with music and fear, was now empty but laden with anticipation. Something was about to be revealed, something that Olivia knew could not be undone. Martha, still holding her steady gaze, let the silence linger for a few more seconds, as if what came next needed to be absorbed carefully. The sound of the melody ceased so suddenly that the silence that followed seemed almost deafening. Martha closed her mouth, and Olivia felt an immediate emptiness fill the air. It was as if, with the end of the song, everything around them had frozen. The wind that had gently swayed the trees before came to a halt. The distant murmurs of the townspeople faded away, and even the birds fell silent. In the space between the two women, an abyss of unspoken words formed, growing with each passing second. Olivia couldn't catch her breath. Her heart beat so rapidly that she feared Martha might hear it. Whatever this woman was about to say was big enough to change everything. She felt it in the heavy air, in the way Martha's eyes watched her with a mix of pity and affection. Something terrible and inevitable was about to be revealed. The silence was not just an emptiness between them, it was the prelude to a truth that Olivia wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Martha's eyes, filled with wisdom and pain accumulated over the years, remained fixed on Olivia, as if measuring how much the young woman could bear. There was a serenity in her posture but also hesitation. She knew that what she was about to say would change everything for Olivia, perhaps forever. Olivia, for her part, stood still, as if any movement might break the delicate line holding that moment together. She didn't want Martha to speak, but at the same time she desperately needed the answer that was coming. Time seemed to stretch. Every second in the silence made Olivia's heart beat harder, her chest rising and falling in a desperate attempt to maintain control. She wanted to scream, to demand Martha speak, but the tension was so great that the words refused to come out. The silence was oppressive, almost suffocating. Olivia clutched the strap of her handbag, as if that simple gesture could keep her grounded in reality, while everything around her seemed to be unraveling. Martha, on the other hand, did not rush. Her lips moved briefly as if she wanted to say something, but again she chose not to speak. Her gaze, however, revealed everything. There was pain, regret, and a truth buried for so long that its revelation seemed an unbearable burden. Olivia felt her eyes burning, but she didn't blink. She knew that once Martha spoke the next words, there would be no going back. And the silence, no matter how unbearable, was still a safe refuge, a last moment of ignorance before the inevitable impact of the truth. The world around the two seemed suspended in a bubble of tension. Olivia could feel the cold sweat on her palms as her mind desperately tried to understand what was happening. Something much larger than she had imagined was about to be revealed. She felt like a child lost in a forest, about to discover that the monsters from the stories she heard weren't just metaphors. The air felt heavier, and the anticipation of knowing what Martha held was almost intolerable. With a slow gesture, Martha tilted her head to the side, as if observing Olivia from a different, deeper angle. The hesitation in her eyes was undeniable, but there was also a quiet resolve. It was time. The silence, which seemed to have lasted an eternity, was about to be broken, and Olivia knew that Martha's words would carry a weight that would change everything she thought she knew about herself. She could feel it in the way Martha took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to release a bomb of buried truths. Every heartbeat of Olivia seemed louder in the silence. Her muscles were tense, as if preparing to withstand a physical impact. She could hardly believe what was about to happen. There was something terribly intimate about that moment, an invisible connection between them, woven through silence and expectation. The past, which Olivia had spent years trying to forget, was about to invade her mercilessly. And there was nowhere to run. There was no more escape. Martha took a deep breath, and the sound of her breathing seemed to echo in the suffocating silence. Olivia felt her nerves on edge, as if time was about to collapse around them. The anticipation was almost unbearable, and yet Olivia knew she had to listen. No matter how devastating the truth Martha held might be, she had to face it, even if it meant shattering everything she knew. Martha took a deep breath, her lips trembling slightly, as if each word was a burden that had to be released carefully. When she finally began to speak, her voice was low but carried an emotion so intense that it pierced through the silence like an arrow. "I knew your mother," Martha said, her words sounding like a muffled thunderclap. "She sang that same song to you every night." The impact of these words hit Olivia like a wave, leaving her stunned. This woman knew her mother? How was that possible? Olivia's heart began to race again. The world around her seemed to blur as she tried to process what she had just heard. Her mother. How could Martha know her? Her mind whirled in search of a rational explanation, but nothing made sense. It was as if reality was unraveling before her eyes. She looked at Martha, hoping that there was some mistake, that this was a misunderstanding. But the expression on the old woman's face left no doubt. She was telling the truth. "She used to sing that song to you when you were little," Martha continued, her voice now a bit stronger, yet still filled with sadness. "It was a song that she and I knew very well. It was ours." Olivia took a step back, instinctively trying to distance herself from the avalanche of emotions that surrounded her. The familiarity of that song, which had terrified her, now became even more unsettling. How could Martha know something so intimate? Martha's words floated in the air, filling the empty space between them with an unbearable weight. Olivia felt her throat tighten. Her mother had passed away many years ago, taking with her secrets Olivia had never suspected existed. And now, here, in a square in a town that meant nothing to her, a stranger spoke of those memories with a familiarity that made her question everything. "I don't understand," Olivia managed to whisper, her voice choked. How do you know this?" Martha hesitated for a moment, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly on her lap, as if recalling the past was a painful task. "She meant everything to me, Olivia," Martha said, pronouncing Olivia's name with a softness that made her shiver. "And that song, it was part of our lives. It was part of us." The brightness in Martha's eyes made it clear that she wasn't just talking about the song but about something much deeper. Something that connected the two of them in a way Olivia could not yet comprehend. Olivia began to feel the ground giving way beneath her feet. The image she had of her mother, of her past, seemed to be crumbling with every word Martha uttered. It was as if the woman before her was a living bridge to a past her mother had hidden, a past she never had the chance to know. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured, more to herself than to Martha. The confusion on her face was evident, but there was something else, a growing fear, a sense that everything she thought she knew was about to be destroyed. "I know it's hard to understand," Martha said, her tone gentle but filled with a contained pain. "I know you have questions, and I will answer them all." There was a genuine compassion in Martha's words, as if she felt Olivia's suffering, as if each word pulled from her mouth was reopening an old wound. Olivia, however, didn't know if she was ready to hear the answers. Something in her heart told her that what came next would be devastating. Martha's gaze remained fixed on Olivia, penetrating and full of untold stories. It was the look of someone who knew not only the scars of her own life but also those Olivia carried unknowingly. That moment stretched out, a mix of painful revelations and the anticipation of an even deeper abyss yet to come. The truth, which lingered between the lines of Martha's words, was just a step away from being fully exposed. Olivia was caught between the desperation to flee and the need to know more. Her mind insisted on rejecting all of this, but something in her heart, perhaps the melody of that old song, prevented her from turning away. She needed to understand. She needed to uncover what else was buried in the past she never knew. And looking at Martha, she realized that, despite all the fear she felt, there was no turning back. Martha sighed deeply, as if the words she was about to say carried decades of pain and regret. Her eyes sought Olivia's, and there, in that moment, there was a connection that transcended time. "Your mother? She was my sister." The words came out softly but carried a weight, as if each syllable brought forth memories long buried. Olivia blinked several times, trying to process what she had just heard. Her mother had a sister? How was this possible? Why had she never known? The revelation hung in the air like a heavy cloud, enveloping them in a new reality. Martha, with trembling hands, continued, "Many years ago, we were just two girls trying to survive. Life was hard. Much harder than you can imagine. Our family was poor and opportunities, almost non-existent." Her eyes drifted off for a moment, as if reliving every detail of that distant time. "I was the eldest, and it was my job to protect your mother, to take care of her." Olivia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The woman before her wasn't just a stranger. She was her aunt, a blood relation that had been completely forgotten over time. But what troubled her most was why. Why had her mother never mentioned this? Why had this story been kept secret her entire life? Martha, sensing the whirlwind of emotions taking over Olivia, continued to speak, her voice heavy with the burden of the past. "When your mother was very young, I was forced to make a decision that haunts me to this day." Martha clasped her hands in her lap, her pale fingers twisting. "The poverty was so great that I couldn't take care of her. There wasn't enough food, nor a roof that could shelter us from the cold nights. I tried, oh how I tried, but in the end I had no choice. I gave your mother up for adoption, hoping that she would have a better life. A chance that I could never give her." The silence returned for a moment, but this time it wasn't empty. It was filled with memories and an old pain that clearly still haunted Martha. Olivia could hardly breathe. The woman before her, her aunt, had been responsible for such a devastating decision. "She meant everything to me, but I couldn't keep her with me," Martha continued, tears shimmering in her eyes. "And that decision, Olivia, broke me. I spent years wondering if she was okay, if she had found the happiness I couldn't provide." Olivia felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. She remembered her mother as a strong and loving woman, but one who never spoke much about the past. Now she understood why. "She never told me any of this," Olivia whispered, her voice faint, almost inaudible. Martha nodded as if she had already expected this. "I imagine she kept this secret for a long time," Martha said, her voice gentle and sympathetic. "Perhaps it was too painful for her." Martha continued, her voice breaking with the memories. "I had no news of her until I saw her again years later, already married and with a daughter. At that time I didn't have the courage to approach. What could I say? That I was the sister who gave her up, who left her behind." The words, spoken with such regret, carried a deep sorrow. "I convinced myself that it was too late. She had a life and I became a shadow of a past she no longer needed to carry." Olivia struggled to maintain her composure, but with each new sentence she felt more lost. "Why now, Martha? Why tell me all this now?" The question came out as a desperate whisper. Martha looked at her with a bittersweet kindness, like someone finally releasing a burden. "Because, my dear, there are moments when the past must be confronted. The truth, no matter how painful, needs to come to light. I owe you that. And I owe that to your mother." The weight of those words fell like a storm over Olivia. Her entire life had been built on secrets, and now, in that moment, everything seemed to be crumbling. She didn't know what to do with that revelation. She didn't know how to deal with the reality that her story was far more complex and painful than she had ever imagined. Olivia was completely paralyzed. Martha's words echoed in her mind, but their meaning seemed to slip away with each passing moment. Her mother had a sister? And this sister was here in front of her in the flesh? The ground seemed to vanish beneath her feet, and for the first time in her life, Olivia, who was used to being in control, didn't know how to react. She, who always saw herself as the master of her own destiny, now faced a truth about her past that left her vulnerable in a way she had never imagined. The air around Olivia seemed heavy, suffocating her. She felt her legs falter as if her strength was draining away. The life she had built, the empire of luxury and power, suddenly seemed fragile, insignificant in the face of something much greater. The fact that her mother had a sister, a woman who had been so close yet so distant, shattered the stable image of her world. Olivia had always believed she knew her roots, but now she realized how unexplored the past was, filled with painful secrets. Her body, always accustomed to glamour and perfection, now trembled with vulnerability. The strong, unshakable woman felt like a child again, lost in a story she didn't know. She searched for words, but none seemed adequate to express the confusion that dominated her heart. A void began to open inside her, a gap of lost and unknown years that left deep marks. Who was this woman standing before her after all? And how could she deal with this? Olivia always thought she was in control of her life. She controlled her emotions, her business, her relationships. But at that moment, the revealed truth left her at the mercy of something she couldn't dominate, the past. For the first time, she felt small in the face of circumstances, as if everything she had ever known about her own story was just the tip of an iceberg. The layers of her own life were crumbling, and the impact left her adrift in a sea of uncertainties. Olivia's eyes, usually cold and calculating, were wide open, unable to hide the whirlwind of emotions stirring within. She felt like she was being stripped of her emotional defenses, the carefully constructed masks over the years. This elderly woman, with her simple and painful words, had torn the veil that covered the truth. Olivia felt like she was facing an abyss. How could her mother have hidden this for so long? How could she herself have lived an entire life without ever knowing? The shock of discovering that she had an aunt, a part of her family she had never suspected, left Olivia emotionally shaken in a way she had never experienced. The void her mother left when she passed was now filled with questions and gaps she wasn't sure she could face. It was as if the past was rising from a dark, forgotten place, coming for her, claiming what had always been part of her story. And the certainty that there was no escape from this truth was paralyzing. She wanted to speak, but the words were caught in her throat, suffocated by a mixture of pain and disbelief. Olivia looked at Martha, trying to see her as something other than a stranger, but the chasm between them was still too deep. At the same time, there was a part of Olivia that desperately wanted to cling to this new revelation, to understand what had been hidden for so long. But at that moment all she could feel was shock. A deep shock that rendered her incapable of processing everything that was being revealed. The face of Olivia, once flawless and indifferent, was now marked by raw vulnerability. She felt control slipping through her fingers and it terrified her. The woman who always prided herself on her strength and independence was now faced with a truth she couldn't change, a family connection she hadn't chosen, but which now stood there undeniable and powerful. Olivia found herself surrounded by ghosts of the past, by a story that could no longer be ignored. Gradually she realized she couldn't just turn her back and leave. What lay before her wasn't a choice but a reality. The truth that Martha carried couldn't be undone, and Olivia felt herself being drawn into it, like a boat adrift in a violent current. No matter how much she tried to resist, she knew that from that moment on, her life would never be the same. And, for the first time, the idea of completely losing control was both terrifying and liberating. Martha's trembling hands rested on her lap, and her eyes, now shining with tears struggling not to fall, focused on Olivia. "I never forgot her," Martha said, her voice choked but firm. "Your mother, my sister." The pain of losing her was a wound that never healed. But despite everything, the only thing that always kept me connected to her was this song. Her voice faltered slightly, but she maintained a melancholic smile, as if the melody was both a blessing and a curse, an invisible thread that never broke. Olivia felt the lump in her throat tighten even more. Her head spun, trying to absorb everything she had heard, but emotion was stronger than reason. She had never known of Martha's existence, never imagined that her mother might have carried such a painful past. And now, before her, was this woman who not only knew the song but lived each verse as a vivid memory of a lost time. "I heard you sing, just like your mother did," Martha continued, her voice low but charged with emotion. "That's how I knew. I knew you were her daughter." Olivia's tears finally fell. She, who had always seemed impenetrable, unable to let herself be affected by any feeling that threatened her control, now found herself crumbling. Every word from Martha felt like a chain pulling her deeper into the truth of her own story. "I've hummed that melody since I was a girl," Olivia murmured, trying to recall when exactly the song had become so natural to her. "It was always with me." Martha nodded, as if she had always known this, as if the song was a thread that had always united them, even when they were apart. "It was your mother who passed it on to you without you even realizing it. The same song that she and I sang when we were just two girls, when everything was simpler before the world separated us." Silence fell over them, heavy with emotion, and for the first time Olivia felt no need to fill it with words. She simply let the tears fall, the weight of the past finally catching up to her. Martha's eyes were brimming with tears too, but there was a kind of peace in them, as if, by reconnecting with Olivia, she had finally found a part of the sister she lost. "When I heard you singing that melody, I knew. I knew that after all these years, my past had finally found me. And now, my dear, I know that your mother is here too somehow. She lives in you through this song." Olivia looked at Martha, her eyes still wet, and realized that despite all the time that separated them, there was something undeniably familiar about this woman. Perhaps it was the way she spoke with gentleness or the sparkle in her eyes when she mentioned her mother. But more than that, it was the song. The same song that for years had been an unconscious comfort to Olivia, now revealed itself as the link connecting her to a greater story, to a past she did not know. The two women remained there in silence, sharing a moment of reconnection without the need for words. The distance between them, which had once seemed insurmountable, began to diminish. Olivia, who had always felt alone, even when surrounded by luxury and power, now realized that there was something deeper, something that no amount of money could replace. A story, an origin that she had never known but that was right there in front of her, waiting to be reclaimed. Martha slowly extended her hand, her thin, fragile fingers trembling slightly. Olivia hesitated for a moment, but then, without saying anything, she took her aunt's hand. The touch was warm and familiar, and in that instant, they both knew that something had changed. The tears, once filled with pain, now carried a mix of relief and longing. There was, in the shared silence, a promise that despite the lost time, there was still something to be rebuilt. And as the first rays of sun filtered through the trees around the square, Olivia and Martha, holding hands, understood that the past could be painful, but it also offered a chance for redemption. The song that had both separated and connected them over the years was now the bridge that brought them together, carrying with it the hope of a new beginning. Olivia stood in the center of the square, holding Martha's hand, but her mind was far away. The initial shock of the revelation had passed, giving way to a deep reflection she could not ignore. For the first time in many years, her life of luxury and superficiality seemed fragile, almost irrelevant. Everything she had accumulated, the designer clothes, the expensive cars, the exclusive parties, now felt empty. A weight grew in her chest, as if the burden of her lifestyle was finally revealing itself. Beside Martha, the simplicity of the small town began to take on a new meaning. The old facades, the smiling people, and the trees swaying in the wind seemed more real, more authentic than everything she knew. For years, Olivia had hidden behind the facade of success and wealth, believing it would protect her from pain and emptiness. But now, realizing the depth of her family's untold stories, she felt empty, disconnected from something far more important than any luxury. She looked at Martha's hands, frail and wrinkled but full of history. Here was her true connection, a blood tie that couldn't be ignored. And then Olivia reflected on the woman she had become, a socialite surrounded by superficiality, but who, deep down, had always felt alone. What had she sacrificed for this lifestyle? Family? Truth? Meaning? It was painful to admit, but she knew she couldn't continue living the same way. Something inside her cried out for change. The images of her luxurious life began to fade in her mind. Every grand event she had attended, every extravagant purchase, every false compliment she had received, all of it seemed devoid of meaning in the face of the truth that now stood before her. There was a part of Olivia that had always known her shining world did not fulfill her, but she had never allowed that thought to grow. Now, however, the decision loomed clearly. Something had to change. Olivia realized that she could no longer ignore the emptiness she had tried to fill with material things. The luxury had isolated her, distanced her from the things that truly mattered, and ironically, she had become a prisoner of the lifestyle she had fought so hard to maintain. Next to Martha, she felt that the path her life had taken had been an escape, an attempt to avoid facing the truth about her family, about who she truly was. The tears, which had once been of shock and sadness, were now of liberation. She knew what she needed to do. The choice lay before her: continue living the false life she had built or abandon it all and reconnect with her true story, her family, with something much more real. The weight of the decision was crushing, but at the same time, the sense of clarity that washed over her brought a new lightness. What lay ahead of her was a chance to start over. Olivia took a deep breath, as if preparing to let go of the last vestige of a life that no longer belonged to her. The opulence, the mask she had worn for so long, all of it would be left behind. Because, for the first time, she wanted something genuine. There was no more room for superficiality. And looking at Martha, she realized that a new journey lay before her. One that involved reconnecting with her roots, with the woman she never knew she could be. She understood that true wealth was not in what she owned but in the connections she built. And there, before her, was Martha, a bridge to the past, a chance to reclaim everything that had been lost. It was time to let go of the world that had imprisoned her and embrace the new life unfolding, full of challenges but also full of meaning. Olivia felt ready to make that choice. And in that moment, she knew that what truly mattered was not what she would lose by leaving her old life behind, but what she would gain by rediscovering who she was. Olivia looked at Martha, feeling a wave of emotions bubbling up inside her. There was something profoundly liberating in that moment, something she never imagined she could feel. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and embraced the old woman. Martha, surprised, hesitated for only a second before wrapping Olivia in her frail but affectionate arms. The warmth of that embrace brought an indescribable peace, a silent understanding that, despite the years lost, there was something that time could not erase, the unbreakable bond of blood and shared history. Martha's hands on Olivia's back were light but firm, as if she feared that moment might disappear at any moment. The two women, once separated by secrets and silence, now found themselves united by the truth, by the song that, in an unexpected way, had brought them together. Olivia closed her eyes and let the tears fall without resistance. For the first time, they were not of pain but of relief, of reconnecting with something greater than her life of luxury had ever given her. When they finally pulled away, Martha's eyes were shining with tears that had finally fallen. She smiled, a smile filled with relief, as if the burden she had carried for decades was lifting. "We have so much to catch up on, my dear," she said, her voice gentle and full of promises. Olivia nodded, feeling a new strength growing inside her. It didn't matter what they had lost. What mattered was what they could still build together. The scars of the past were still there, but now there was a road ahead, and they would walk it side by side. Hand in hand, they began to walk through the small town. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dancing shadows around them, and the cobblestones, which had once seemed so hard and cold to Olivia, now held a different charm, a story in every crack. The quiet streets, the flowers in the gardens, everything seemed more alive, more meaningful. The walk, which might have been just a simple crossing of the square, now symbolized something much greater, the beginning of a new journey. As they walked, the townspeople watched with curiosity but also with a sense that something special had happened there. Olivia, who had arrived so distant and disconnected from everything and everyone, now seemed to belong to this place. The distance that once separated the elegant woman and the small town had disappeared. Beside Martha, she felt she was coming home. A home that was not made of luxurious walls but of stories, memories, and a past that had finally been uncovered. As their footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestone streets, Olivia felt that the weight she had carried for so many years was beginning to lift. She no longer needed to be the perfect, untouchable woman that the world expected. Now, she was simply Olivia, a woman who had been lost but had finally found herself. Beside Martha, she felt that each step brought her closer to who she truly was. There were no more masks, no more pretenses. Just the truth and the promise of a new beginning. They walked to the edge of the square, where the wind carried back the gentle sound of the leaves in the trees. Martha paused for a moment, holding Olivia's hand firmly, and looked at her with affection. "Your mother would be proud of you," she said in a whisper, her voice trembling with emotion. Olivia felt a final tear roll down her face, but this time she didn't wipe it away. She simply let the emotion take over, knowing that, somehow, her mother was also there, walking alongside them through the song that had never been forgotten. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and gold as the two walked away, still hand in hand. There was no more rush, no urgency. Just the certainty that, together, they would rebuild what had been lost, step by step, note by note. The melody that had once been a symbol of longing was now a promise of new memories, of a life that still had much to offer. And as the horizon opened before them, Olivia knew that her path, for the first time in a long time, made sense. The past had been confronted, and the present was full of possibilities. There were no more secrets, no more shadows. Just the future where Martha and Olivia, united by a shared story, would walk together. What lay ahead would be built on love, forgiveness, and reconnection. And the small town, with its quiet streets and vast sky, would be the stage for this new beginning. If you enjoyed the incredible story of Martha and Olivia, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. If you love heartwarming chronicles and wish to support our channel to keep bringing more quality content, consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the first pinned comment. Your help is essential for us to continue improving. Thank you for your support. See you in the next touching chronicle.